Section 36 of the Soul, or Rational Psychology. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Soul, or Rational Psychology, by Emanuel Swedenborg. Translated by Frank Sewall, 1837 to 1915, and others. Section 36. Chapter 21, Part 1. The Spiritual Loves, or the Loves of the Soul. Number 429. That we may know of what kind are the affections and loves of the rational mind, it is necessary that we consider not only the affections of the animus, concerning which we have just now treated, but also the loves of the supereminent affections of the soul. These are called superior, the former inferior, the latter spiritual, and the former purely natural or corporeal. Because the rational mind does not possess any loves of its own, but is obliged to be ruled and drawn here and there, either by spiritual or superior loves of the soul, or by the corporeal inferior loves of the animus, therefore it is necessary that we should know what and of what nature are the loves of the soul, or rather of our spiritual mind. For thence flow the virtues and vices which are the essential determination of the human mind. 430. All loves of the soul, which may be called the eminent or spiritual affections, are universal, and they embrace in themselves, in minutest particulars, in potency, all the affections in general, which are able to exist specially or in a part. From a certain universal love, as if from their own fountainhead, flow all special and particular loves, like brooks. They cannot manifest themselves in any place except in the animus and the mind, in which they are determined into certain genera or certain species, all of which look to a certain universal love in the soul, from which when they descend as streams, they are on the way liable to be defiled by imperfections, which are adjoined to nature, and so they scarcely know that they are derived from so pure a fount. The animus derives its power of desiring or of loving from its own soul, but the power of loving in one manner and not in another it derives from its form, as also from its connection with the soul by means of the rational mind. Therefore the effect of almost all science is to be able to subordinate particular under special loves, and these under general ones, or to arrange them into their own classes, and to perceive in what manner they flow from universal or spiritual loves. This is the true psychological and pneumatical science. 431. All souls are purely spiritual forms. Thus all their minds and loves are purely spiritual, whether they are good or evil. For the spirit, whether it be good or evil, is nevertheless purely a spirit, or purely a mind, and it has loves purely spiritual, that is, universal, in which are contained the principles of the inferior and purely natural loves. The good angel, as the evil angel or devil, is purely a spirit, and the loves of both are purely spiritual, with this difference, that what the good spirit purely loves is contrary to what an evil spirit loves, or is what he is said to hate. For there exist pure love and pure hate, which are purely contrary loves. Thus there are spiritual loves good and evil, but they are all universal, superior, and belong to the soul, and are most perfectly good or evil. But because good and evil, as truth and falsity, are opposites, and in one subject there may exist a mixture of good and evil, and truth and falsity, owing to that mixture, in accordance with the received habit of speaking, that which is not purely good is called impure, or that which is purely evil very impure. So love is preeminently known as the love of good. although there is a love of evil, which from its own nature is conjoined with the hatred of good. But lest we may produce confusion of ideas in the following parts, we propose to use the expression the mind and the purely spiritual love, but not the pure mind or the pure spiritual love. For on account of acquired ideas, we are scarcely able to discern that that is impure which is not purely good or purely true. Strictly speaking, all that is impure, which is mixed with imperfections below itself, so that the human rational mind is never pure. The love of being above oneself. 432. The first and supreme spiritual love, or love of the soul, and the most universal, is the love of a being above oneself, from whom it has derived its essence, and perpetually does derive it, in which, through which, and on account of which being, it is and lives. This love is the first of all, because nothing can exist and subsist from itself except God, who exists in himself and alone is who is. Because the soul feels this in itself, the supreme love is innate in it, and thus the very divine love is in us. 433. There exists a purely contrary love, yet it is spiritual and supreme, or a pure hatred of divine power, or of a being above self. This love is called diabolic. From this we may recognize of what quality good love is, and from the good of what quality the evil is, for there exist infinitely different mediate loves. This love is called the love of evil. The evil mind itself, such as it is the mind of certain souls, for the soul of no one is absolutely similar to that of another, nor ought it to be similar, that there may be a society of souls, and the most perfect form of a society. The evil spirit, or the diabolic mind, even feels in itself that there is a being above itself, from which it has derived its own essence, that that being is to be loved above self, and the love to be testified by adoration. But although it recognizes, nevertheless it disdains and envies it, and rebels against its own consciousness, and hates the very truth that it is so, and thus it loves self above that being, whence there is a perpetual incurable hatred, such that he would wish to destroy himself 1,000 times, if only at the same time he could destroy that superior being, both without himself and in himself, which cannot be destroyed. The conscience of such a mind is in anguish when it is doing nothing contrary to the better conscience, and it so acts because it hates the truth most deeply and from its very nature, and would perpetually love to destroy it. There are certain rational minds which seem to be images of this spiritual mind. May such not be the state of their soul? The love of a friend as oneself. 434. The love of a friend as oneself, or where there exists a love of another equal to that of oneself, is a spiritual love. For the soul or spiritual mind recognizes another soul and mind as an associate, and one of a society or divine kingdom. This flows from the nature of things, as well as from the first or most eminent of all loves. 435. From nature. One or a part by itself is as if nothing, unless it has relation to many things with which it is. Thence exist a certain form of such things, and the affections of form. There is no harmony unless it is of many united, and by virtue of the manner in which these are united among themselves. Thus there is no felicity of souls unless of many together, no form and conjunction unless through love, and through love of another as oneself. Whatever is in another is communicated to oneself and appropriated as one's own. Thence results a multiplied felicity of all, which is concentrated in each one. 436. From divine love. Whoever loves a friend as himself does not do so on account of the friend, but for the image of himself in that friend, and when the love is reciprocal, on account of the image of that one in himself, so that that one becomes a participant of that love, and of the thence resulting felicity. And thus the harmony of all the friends who constitute the whole society may transcribe its joy and happiness into oneself, and from oneself, in whom the idea of the whole is concentrated, into each, and thus into all. By this means, a felicity beyond all power to describe, and inmost, even a divine felicity, is excited. And since that love is not towards self or society principally, but towards a being above self, to whom one is united by love, one loves the friend through love towards him with whom he desires to be united, and who resides inmostly in the friend. This supereminent or divine love, which extends itself to the universal society of souls, and pours out that very felicity from its own essence, cannot help produce this as its first effect, that one loves that companion who, like oneself, also is loved by the divine, so that they cannot otherwise be united than by a conjoined love towards him who loves both with his own love. Wherefore that very conjunction resulting from love descends solely from a common love of a superior, which is the common universal, and hence the particular bond of all. Spiritual love towards a companion extends itself so far as not to hate even a devil, but the evil which is in him, and if he were curable he would love him, but as it is he only pities him. Therefore the most universal spiritual love is the love of a being above oneself. From this descends the love towards a friend, for the individual loves of friends are united by a supreme love, and from this they are derived. These individual loves taken together constitute that universal love which is divine. 437. There is a contrary love, spiritual as well as natural, or a pure hatred of others and love of oneself alone. This love is diabolical, and it follows naturally from the hatred towards a superior, or God. Whatever joins the minds of friends, this disjoins, for those impelled by it seek to cast down that superior beneath themselves, and they cast him down in themselves. Consequently, all those who are his and are in him whom they judge inferior to themselves. It declares itself rather their God, regarding itself as the universal, or as omnipotent, or of such a quality in itself as God is. Consequently, all things which subsist from God are subject to itself. Wherefore these do not love their companions unless they agree with their projects, and are minded as themselves, not from love, but from a likeness of will to accomplish an end. But because there is no universal or superior hatred by which the minds of those who hate may be conjoined, there is no regulated society, but one is armed against the other, for they have their very essences in hatred, and all that they love is vice. Thus in this same hatred remain their soul and life, and one rushes to the destruction of another and tortures another. These results follow as simple consequences. From these statements it is manifest of what kind the intermediate love is, for there are infinite differences between the pure love and the pure hatred of those who are associated. To love society as many selves. 438. The love of many, of society, of country, of the human race, is not above that of self in the ratio in which is love towards God. but is greater than that of self in an arithmetical or geometrical ratio or proportion. It becomes so by simple addition or multiplication. In an arithmetical ratio, if love increases according to number; in a geometrical one, if according to number and the greater and smaller societies, while at the same time their sums increase. But love is elevated above self, as an inferior power is to a higher power. For example, as a root is related to its fourth power or cube. So that while the love itself may be almost as nothing, respectively, still it becomes something according to the number of those who are loved and who are able to love. Therefore love of the neighbor as oneself supposes a multiplication of love, respectively, in the degree that the society is numerous. Nevertheless, the increase of love is wholly from the same cause. For in the degree that it is more universal, there is reciprocally a greater sensation of love in oneself, and of felicity thence resulting, since all its delights increase in the same degree. This love, however, being spiritual, does not concern terrestrial society, but the celestial society of souls. It is not of the mind, but of the soul, and thence it is pure. For, since it is of this quality, pure truth is in it. 439. The contrary love, or pure hatred, increases in a similar ratio towards its many objects. Thus it takes place in an analogous arithmetical or geometrical ratio, indeed as opposed to the divine will in a double and triplicate ratio. It is not therefore necessary to describe this more fully. Such is diabolical hatred. It is not love of one's own society, but of evil alone, which never intimately associates minds, because there is nothing above which is a common bond. Hence the one aims at the eternal destruction of the other, for each one numbers the other among those who are evil, and because the very truth they know convicts those. Hence it affords a reason why they are not to be loved, and why they deserve punishment. The love of being near the one loved. 440. The love of being near to God who is loved is the most eminently spiritual love, for it is in the very nature of love itself. Hence, when there is pure love, there is nothing of the love of being above one's companions, that is, no love contrary to the love of a friend. With this contrary love, pure love has nothing in common. It does not reflect upon itself, but should it do so, lest there should come a desire of precedence over one's friend, it would assign itself the lowest place of all. But God himself is the one who exalts, and thus the love to be nearest to the beloved can exist without any desire of eminence. Wherefore it pertains immediately to the love of God, but not to the love of the neighbor as oneself. Then indeed the love of self wholly vanishes, and there arises a sort of contempt of self, on seeing oneself to be near God, and yet so infinitely distant from him, and to be almost nothing. Through him alone has he any being, and the more in the degree that he is nearer to him. When there exists this pure love, together with a love towards the neighbor, then there is an absence of jealousy, if another is nearer to him and superior to himself. For then he loves the superior so much the more, because he is nearer to God, whom he himself loves. But indeed, if he does not look solely to love towards God, but regards also his own happiness, eminence, or love of self, then the love is not pure, but mingled with jealousy. Envy ever presupposes something of love of self, of eminence among equals, and always reveals that it is so far distant from the love towards God. 441. The love of being remote from God, who is love itself, is the effect of diabolical hatred itself, conjoined with the greatest jealousy if one witnesses the success of another's kingdom or society. Thus one is stimulated by envy to prevent his neighbor's enjoying success, and his hatred is rendered most intense. But indeed, when he sees his neighbor's success assured, and is not able to further resist it, then this hatred is turned into the last degree of envy and fury, as much against self as against the neighbor. In this seems to consist infernal torment. The love of being eminent in happiness, in power, and in wisdom. 442. The love of eminence in happiness is never a divine love, although it be spiritual, for in so far as a person loves his own happiness instead of the happiness of others, so far he loves himself more than others, and thus so far he removes himself from those two fundamental loves of the first source of love, and becomes more unhappy. To love God and the neighbor for the sake of one's own happiness is for one's own sake. Thus it is not pure love. But to love God for his own sake, because he is love itself, and to love the neighbor for God's sake, because this is his love, and because any other love is the love of self, is pure love. But to love chiefly on account of the effect of love is contrary to order itself. For happiness flows of itself as an effect from these two loves, and pure love does not look to effect, but to love itself, abstractly from effect. 443. The love of surpassing others in power is similar to the love of excelling in happiness, for one involves the other. As we always suppose, there is happiness in power. This love of eminence discloses a love of self instead of others, such as the love of ruling always is. Thus it is still less divine, although it be spiritual. 444. The love of being eminent in wisdom is similar. To strive after wisdom is a virtue, but to do so for the sake of being eminent through wisdom is a vice. For wisdom itself, like happiness and power, is a necessary consequent of the love of God above self. So that to love happiness, power, and wisdom chiefly is to prefer them to God, or to love God less than self, or equally with self. This indeed is not a diabolical love, for the devil does not love or desire to love and adore God for any end which is the necessary consequent of love, but he entirely hates him. Wherefore this seems to be the love of human souls after the fall of Adam. Thus it is in our souls, and indicates their perverse state. Yet we ought nevertheless to recover that pristine state, and both by prayer and the grace of God, we are even able to strive for this end with our own powers. 445. The love of eminence conjoined with hatred towards God and the neighbor is diabolical, nor can it exist without the love of self above others, or spurious ambition, avarice, inhumanity, and many other vices or crimes. It especially manifests itself in the love of power over others. The desire to be able to be over others is the desire to be more than man, thus to be equal to God. It loves this means as an end, for instance, honor, riches, possessions, which affections go on increasing and never terminate, for they aspire to the infinite, and believe themselves at the last to have reached something infinite, although it will be as far distant as the finite from the infinite, should they have become possessed of the universe itself. The happiness to which such a one aspires is supposed to be in power itself, and to be reflected by it upon him. But because his love comes from a source contrary to felicity, he becomes the more unhappy. 446. This love is contrary to wisdom because it is contrary to God, who is love and wisdom. Therefore it is hatred of wisdom, and also hatred of the true intelligence which dictates wisdom, of which nature is the love of those in the desire of ruling. These do not love wisdom on account of wisdom, but that by this means they may better rule over human minds, which power they esteem as wisdom. Except for this, they would desire all wisdom to be extinguished, and wish that the dark ages might return. Section 36.